brief introduction to image verification. I hope it's of some use to the participants. If there is an opportunity, I would like to share the other platforms, like whether it's video or whether it's other social media platforms, the way we can debunk fake news. Some takeaways. Other platforms, like whether it's video or whether it's other social media platforms, the way we can debunk fake news. Some takeaways. Other platforms, like whether it's video or whether it's other social media platforms. It's important to look for official links. Important to look at the source of your information, definitely. It's important to look for official links. You can actually go to the details of image verification using geocode and other with geographical limitation, like how we have time filters. But that's going to be a little longer, and I think I would like to stop here and take questions to the brief introduction that we have had to medical misinformation and fake news. Verifying fake news. And I think I would like to stop here.
Dr. Nirmala, I think we will take questions together at the end. That way we'll be able to cover a lot more subjects also. Thank you so much, Dr. Nirmala. Thank you for that engaging session. We got to know about very specific tools of how we can actually reverse image search and check our multiple forwards and information that actually hit us. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. Our second speaker today has over 2 decades of journalism experience and is the Chief of Bureau of the Hindu in Tamil Nadu. Ramya Kanyan's work features issues of health, development, gender, education, and a whole lot of social issues. A bibliophile and a photography enthusiast, Ramya's session today is titled "The Empire Strikes Back: How Journalism Learned to Cope During COVID-19." Personally, I love the Star Wars reference, and it's our pleasure to have you here with us. Ramya, over to you.
Hi, thank you. Are you able to hear me? Yeah?
Yes.
Sure. So I also have a presentation that I will try and attempt to make now. And let me know if you, and of course we can have a conversation right through. Just a minute, I'm trying to. So I also have a presentation that I will try present now. Let me know if you, and of course we can have a conversation right through. Just a minute, I'm trying to. Are you able to see it? Can someone unmute and let me know?
It's loading, yes. It is visible, Ramya. You can go.
All right.
Yes. Thank you.
Right. So, like your professor just said, I'm also a Star Wars fan, and I couldn't avoid this sort of reference. But what I'm trying to convey here is basically that right through COVID, we've learned a lot of lessons the media has. It has been a complete learning experience. It's like as if you went to school and learned everything that you had to learn all over again, and learned different ways of doing it as well. That has been a very, very, in some ways it has been a refreshing experience, but one can't deny the fact that it has also been a very stressful period for journalists, simply because the tools that we usually employ for our trade were no longer available to us. And we'll see more of that as we go along. The tools that we usually employ for our trade. Yeah. So, what is the media's place? What is its role in an epidemic? Does it have a role at all? I think, if anything at all, we've learned in these past 6 months, it's that the media has a very important role to play, especially during an epidemic. It has been, as you can see, an ally, a partner that brings you daily information, in fact, hour-to-hour information on all the breaking news aspects. It has been, in some aspects, it's also been an adversary And in some cases, people have complained about, the unnecessary presence of the media, whether the media is a pain in the wrong place. Whatever it is, it's very clear that you can't really handle an epidemic without handling the media, without taking the media along. So, and I mean, this might seem very simple, but my significant point is the last point, or rather, social media itself and WhatsApp. And this pandemic is an excellent time to evaluate just how big social media has grown, just how big WhatsApp is. And like the joke goes, like the meme goes, it's not just media, it's a university with all kinds of multidisciplinary qualifications. WhatsApp messages will tell you everything from how to intubate someone on a ventilator to how to make country bombs at home. So, and the problem is that there's a great, despite it's sort of amorphousness, there's a great deal of believability that the public seems to have in WhatsApp. So, if you counter all kinds of rubbish, if you drink water mixed with turmeric, it will make sure that you don't get. Is that? I mean, you can't sometimes counter what you have in terms of WhatsApp with science. If you show science to people, they're like, no, I read this on WhatsApp, it must be true, even if they don't exactly know what the source is. So this is something that the traditional media is now facing as a threat. So newspapers, TV channels, websites, radio, even Twitter and Facebook are having this new challenge of trying to verify what WhatsApp puts out. And sometimes it can be a huge challenge. So it's very clear that we need to do the things right. We need to do everything that we do. We may not start learning to do the right things. For instance, in the beginning of this epidemic, I don't think even the media got a sense how dangerous mode of transmission was. So we had people, in places, press conferences, where this was you cases among journalists. We had also, we lost a few people. And that has been a very sobering experience. Death and loss teaches you like nothing else can actually. So the thing is that for scientists, for people outside, we are at a position where we have to tell them that the media can be, it's a good tool. This is what we have to convince our sources, researchers, scientists, doctors, whoever you are working with, that the media can be your friend. You as a journalist can be a friend, a good tool, especially in an epidemic. But unless handled well, the entire media scenario can even be a very big mistake. So if you use the media well as a tool, if you use journalism well as a tool, this rubbish that sometimes comes out as WhatsApp forwards or misconceptions that exist in the community can be filtered out by the media, very aggressively. But unless the media knows its facts as and when they emerge, it's going to be difficult for us to also take the right messages to the people. So therefore, trust the media rather than secrecy and subterfuge. So at this point, I'd like to point out one of the key challenges we had as media covering in all states. This is not just Tamil Nadu. I'm sure it was the case in Delhi, in Mumbai, in Hyderabad, and Vizag, wherever. This was a period where there was a huge outflow of data. The government had emerged of data. And enough data initially. So we were getting a lot of patchy information. We were getting information that they thought would, suit the media. And initial stages, there was a lack of trust there. There was secrecy there. There was concealment of information, concealment of data. And that was one of the things that we had to learn to fight. We had to learn to find alternate sources. We had to learn to convince the government and the media to be more open. Government and aid agencies, which were also dealing with information, to be open. We had to, sit down and teach ourselves the basics of this epidemic. At least all the health reporters that, really meant to do a serious job. This epidemic sat down, we attended a lot of webinars, tried to understand what this was about, what was different about this epidemic versus anything else that we had seen. And that was missing, that trust was missing, and there was secrecy and a great deal of mistrust between journalists and other groups. So there was what we know and what is commonly known, as everything went wrong at a certain point of time. So there's a lot of misinformation, more misinformation, half truths, very unscientific advice, and as a result, of course, there's lies, there's unverified news, there were rumors, and a lot of fear mongering. I mean, I'm not saying that the fear has disappeared completely from the minds of our people, and it shouldn't either, because this is a condition or a disease that we have to be careful about. We have to take our precautions, even as we go out in search of news, to present the truth and to cut down on misinformation and the rumors in society. But we need to take it carefully. We need to take it with a great deal of caution. That is something that the epidemic has taught us, to prioritize ourselves, to make sure that we are safe. In fact, as journalists on the field, I'm sure those of you who've had that experience, it's about throwing caution to the winds when we are in the pursuit of a story. So whether it's as simple as an accident, a road accident, or whether it's a more complex story about environmental damage caused by, say, industrial discharge, the journalist throws a fair bit of caution to the wind to be at the spot, to tell the story from the location. Here, we weren't able to do that. There was no way we could get into the ICUs and secluded wards and quarantine wards to see what's happening on the ground. This was something that we were used to doing. But slowly we learned the hard way that using masks, accessing to critical care units is still not possible, and I don't think we should be demanding that either. But there are places that we go to now that, sometimes COVID care centers armed with our PPE kits and masks and sanitizers. Some of us even carry sanitizers around with us. And we've learned to do this with a fair deal of safety for ourselves, ensuring a fair deal of safety for ourselves, and trying to do what we do regularly, which is bust misinformation, half-truths, and rumors, and make sure that the fear mongering to some extent comes down. So what we need, did we get what we need? Let me tell you initially that maybe this was not the right time for demanding things that we needed training as journalists, because this was a very extraordinary circumstance, and we needed to be trained, retrained in the basic tools of the trade because we couldn't employ what we had. We used to going to the field, going to the spot, going to the area. That's what we've been trained as journalists. But the first time that was not possible. So we looked at other sources, we looked at data, which was emerging as a huge sort of repository of information. Data was telling us about trends, data was giving us the larger picture. So we looked at that, but the problem is that not all journalists are trained to look at data or other sources of information. They're not trained to do journalism a little differently. So what was needed at this point was a lot of in the job training, and there was a continuing sort of journalism education program was required. Periodic briefings from government, from scientists, from doctors, from WHO. So we did. I mean, if you were smart enough, or if you were following it very thoroughly, then it was possible to have these periodic briefings. At least participate in the webinars and learn a little more. May not immediately yield you stories, but it gave you a lot of background as to what was happening and enhanced your own understanding of the issue. So one of the parallels I'd like to pick at this point was the HIV tuberculosis epidemic. Since we're talking health and epidemics, I thought I'd make a reference to another huge, sort of opportunity for journalists in the past. Of course, they were different because of the very nature of transmission. The very nature of transmission was different. It was not airborne, and therefore it did not pose a risk to people who were covering the issues. There was a great deal of training when it came for journalists, even others, but journalists when it came to understanding the issues of tuberculosis and HIV. At that point, and helping us do better work. There was a great deal, for instance, about suicide, how to cover suicides, how to cover mental health. All these have, at different points of time, have had some inputs, constant inputs for journalists that have helped them. So what was available was the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control in the US. They had a crisis and emergency risk communication framework. It was broad-based, not specifically to do with, not at all to do with, COVID, but it served the purpose to an extent. The ICMR actually was best placed to play the role of a trainer, but I don't think much of it happened. The ICMR did have a few workshops and training programs, but better coordination at that stage would have been wonderful, was my point of view. What happens if the media doesn't do its job properly? And this is a fact, and it has a great impact in society. It leads to emotional anxiety, distress, unnecessary panic, and the worst part has been, the great deal of stigma and discrimination that has happened even as a part of COVID-19. So much so that we hear horror stories about people not going to test themselves for COVID just because they're afraid of the stigma it will lead to in their community. Because of the way we handled this, they padded up and boarded up houses and did not give people access to that, access outside. They had a problem with, releasing information, and people didn't have, even scientists didn't have information in the initial phases. So it's not to blame people, but that's the way this epidemic worked out. It led to people seeking out fake cures, as we sort of touched upon initially, and gets in the way of actual public health interventions. So this kind of rumor mongering and fear also did great deal of damage once before with the immunization campaign where untruths about immunization were spread, and that sort of led people to believe that it was dangerous, it was not good for health, and thus stopped immunizing their children. Worst case scenario, we know deaths because people don't seek interventions on time, and they leave it until it's too late because of this stigma and discrimination that they're afraid of. There have even been cases we've reported about people who were discriminated and then took the extreme step of taking their life simply because of the stigma and discrimination related to COVID 19. So, no news is better than fake news. So, as journalists, certain things don't change. I mean, we are in the pursuit of facts. Facts are key, are most important to us. And verify before you present your facts, because no news is actually much better than fake news. So that sort of comes to the end of my presentation, but I just have a little sort of information to share on how exactly we overcame this sort of issues related to COVID. So, like I said earlier, we dealt with data, we learned to pick our sources, we developed our sources over a period of time, developed new sources over a period of time. But as a media manager, I head the Tamil Nadu Bureau of the Hindu here, based out of Chennai. And at a given point of time, everyone was writing COVID related news. The problem with that is when everyone is writing COVID related news and there is no training, what happens is sometimes people make mistakes that they don't realize that they're making. Journalists make mistakes that they don't realize they're making. This is also something we've conquered and come and overcome over a period of time. So the way to get over this is to speak to people who will take a little time to explain to you. If you're not doing this kind of stories in your beat or the areas that you're used to, obviously there's going to be, it's quite natural to expect that there will be issues covering other areas that you're not familiar with. So spend a lot more time trying to understand the issue, trying to get a grip of the situation, trying to make sense of it first to yourself and then simplify it so that the reader is able to understand you. So over a period of time in COVID, the media managed to come back. Initially, there was a great deal of fear that was hampering us. There was a great deal of, how are we ever going to do this sort of conundrum that we were staring at? But I think we've figured that out now. It's a great deal of knowledge sharing that has been done in this last 5-6 months, and we've also adjusted to a lot more things than we thought we would have to adjust to. But that's fine because that taught us what we have to do. And as a result, I think there's a fairly good deal of understanding in the media about COVID itself. And we realize, of course, that this is constantly evolving. So what you believed as a scientific fact yesterday may not quite be what you are looking for tomorrow. So the facts have also changed because scientists' understanding of COVID has begun to change, is evolving as new and new evidence. As a sort of tips for students, I guess a lot of students are here. So as tips for students, I'd suggest, the biggest tip that COVID has given us, the biggest learning from COVID has been to keep our eyes and ears open all the time. Don't assume that this is going to be the last and final word. It's helped us keep an open mind. It's helped reinforce the values of verification, checking, fact checking, and confirmation and counter confirmation. Presenting multiple points of view. So if you look at it, this is basically what you learned on your first day at journalism school. Or the first day you entered a newspaper or a TV channel, the office of a newspaper or TV channel. This is the first thing we've ever been taught. And while the tools of our trade might have changed, while our sources might have changed, and while how we report things or where we report things might have changed, these basics still hold good. So I think if we stick with the basics, we should still be fine, never mind what epidemic, never mind COVID or any other epidemic that we might face in the future. And that sort of comes to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your patience, and I think we can have questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramya. Thank you for that very interesting session and reminding us that may our force of journalistic basics be with us. Our organizers just mentioned, Ramya, that you might have to leave in a bit. We can have a couple of questions to Ramya if there are any. Organizers just mentioned, and she will be happy to answer. Participants can unmute and ask the question. You can also type it down on the chat box, and I will be able to share the question with the guest and ask the question. You can also type it down on the chat box, and I will be able to share the question with the guest and ask the question. Do we have any questions? You can also type it down on the chat box, and I will be able to share the question. Okay, Ramya, I think your presentation was really clear. So, okay, I think we have one. Ramya, sorry, it just popped up. Aishwarya is on the chat box, and she says, what advice would you give aspiring journalists and college students in the course of our learning?
Yeah, it's pretty much what I summed up at the end, which is go back to the basics. I mean, you'll never have a problem as long as you stick to the basics, which is verification, fact checking, telling the truth, the pursuit of truth, and multiple verifications. So these are, do you remember what you learned on the first day of college? I think you'll have to stick by all that, all those principles. The other thing that maybe you don't have, maybe you're not taught as a subject or a lesson, but is something that really helps is to keep an open mind right through, and that is it has a great deal of value in today's world, especially with COVID. But I'm sure it will serve you well with others. That really helps is to keep an open mind.
Right. We have just one more question. Shama here is asking, you said no news is better than fake news, but today we need to break news faster. So how do we balance both?
Yeah. Sure, that's a very... let me the question. No news is better than fake news. We need to break news faster. So how should we balance both?
Yeah.
That's a very valid question today, especially when even traditional news channels, traditional media, including print, are going web first. So there's a great deal of pressure to send stories fast. But I think it's very important to ensure that we have the facts right first, because there was a lot of information, especially in Tamil Nadu, about COVID infections and COVID deaths among people, which turned out to be false. And in this great daring hurry to report first, we're doing news, actual news, a great deal of disservice. So I think the primary, if you understand that the primary goal of news is to present as many points of view as possible, as much accuracy as possible, then you are not going to be conflicted by news that breaks faster. Because if it's not news at all, which you realize in about 15 minutes to 20 minutes later, you have another ticker which says, so and so is not infected with COVID. I mean, what kind of journalism are we doing? So and so has not died because of COVID. In fact, deaths have been declared even much before the person, the doctors declared deaths. That's the reality in this world. But I think it is important to prioritize facts and the value of truth over breaking news. And I think it's also important to convince your editors that it's important to wait, clarify, and verify before you run with what you have, which might be just a WhatsApp rumor after all.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much, Sonia. Thank you for answering those couple of questions. We will get back to the questions. Our next speaker is also ready. So our next speaker for this session, the final speaker, is a Fulbright Nehru Fellowship recipient, and she holds a Master's in Women's and Gender Studies from the University of Texas, Austin. With over a decade of journalistic experience, Namita Kohli is a senior journalist at The Week and specializes in areas related to health and gender. Her address is titled Trial and Error, Reporting on COVID Studies. Namita, over to you. Namita Kohli is a senior journalist at The Week and specializes in areas related to health and gender.
Okay, hi everyone. Am I visible? Am I audible?
You're audible. The video is yet to come out.
Okay.
Yes, we are able to see you now.
Okay, great. So thank you to all the good people at Christ University to have invited me to share my views and my experience on science reporting and COVID. And all of the related stuff. I'm sure there are very bright and enthusiastic reporters and students in the audience. So I don't have a PPT. Yes, I am so technically challenged and not good with PPTs. So I thought that I'd like to make it a little more interactive for all of you. So I'll speak for a few minutes. I'll share a few tips that I have learned over the past 6-8 months particularly, and then I suppose it would be great to have questions and understand what constraints and limitations you guys are facing, because the limitations that we face might be different from what you face on the field. So essentially, I have a few tips for you here. Now, the pandemic has meant that health and science reporting. Now, these are top beats suddenly. I mean, for all these years in media, especially, there was politics, there was defense, there was economics, and all of these glamorous, high-profile beats. And health was supposed to be a soft beat, it was supposed to be something that, would go on the side, and there are soft stories around diseases and all of that. And suddenly in the last 6 to 8 months, we've seen an explosion of health news. Everybody wants to know what is happening. Everyone is trying to catch up on the science, which is evolving by the day. So health and science reporting has essentially, if I could say, it's getting its due now. There is a lot of interest. We always say that we wish we had the training. Health journalists and science journalists received training, and government looked at adequately training these journalists. But up until now, these conversations were sort of muted, and now suddenly it's all at the forefront. So if you are following these beats for a long time, you will know what I mean. And if you're new to the beat as well, you will understand the challenges that suddenly you have to report on all these studies, all this complex science, infectious diseases and what have you, and all these terminology which is not part of your vocabulary, or at least has not been part of your vocabulary up until now. So I think now is the time for those of you who are interested in the subject to invest in it, in the sense that read up more and sort of talk to people more. And this is the age of webinars. You can access webinars sitting in India. You can access webinars and experts in the US, UK, all across the world. So the field is really wide. It's really open now, and there's a lot of opportunity. So I think I'd like to begin on a positive note that if you really are interested in the subject, there is no better time than this to do your research, your investments. And you will see now in the coming years the discourse around health journalism, science journalism, it's bound to change. There'll be many more opportunities to write. There will be an interest in the news, and there will be an interest to know how we can prevent future pandemics. What have we learned from this pandemic? So in the coming few years, there's going to be a lot of opportunity in that direction. Now, having said that, it's going to take you a lot of time. It's going to take you a lot of effort. It is going to be very demanding. I remember when the pandemic began, there were days I would stay up till late in the night just reading and understanding what experts from not just India, but from across the world were saying on social media. What was the conversation? What were the debates? So that kind of time and investment you will need to make. So that is one thing. Practically every day there are floods of studies. There are preprints, what are essentially scientific studies that have not been peer reviewed. So they have not yet reached that point where, supposing I write an article on journalism, and there will be several editors senior to me who will look at my article and then they will let it pass. So similarly in scientific community, there is a process of vetting. There is a process that clinical studies and trials have to go through before they get published. So what we saw with COVID is that suddenly there was a barrage of these studies, preprints, not peer reviewed. So you are beginning to know new things about the pandemic, about the virus and the effects it has, but it has not been looked at by the experts yet. It is still at that stage, preliminary stage. So what do we do? Now, even as we face these issues, we must remember that we are not scientists. We cannot practically know everything. So, for instance, when I started reporting several years back, it's been many years now, and someone told me that your job is not to know everything. Your job is to know the right people who know everything. So you are not supposed to decode and understand every study, because that's not your domain. Your domain is communication. So you have to reach out to the relevant experts and help uncode, decode, unpack the complex science around it, simple enough for a layperson, yet accurate enough for the scientists to feel confident that yes, this is what this research is. So please do reach out to experts. There are always people, and especially in this pandemic, as we have seen, there are many experts. So choose your experts carefully. They should be from a credible institute. They should have, credibility in their area of expertise. And, they will help you understand what is the takeaway. Now, I remember from one of my reporting assignments at the National Institute of Virology, which is our premier virology institute in Pune. I was writing a story on Zika virus, right? This was a couple of years back. And one of the scientists, he told me a very important thing that stuck with me through all these months. He said, if a scientist cannot explain his research to you in about 2-3 lines, then they probably themselves don't know what they're doing. Now, it sounds very generic and very general, but it's really very useful. You see, scientists are not the best communicators, right? Their expertise lies elsewhere. They're usually also shy. They don't like to speak to media. They don't like to be in the limelight and other things. But if you show interest, if you manage to, strike a rapport with them, if you ask the right questions, they will talk to you. They will invest in you. They will help you understand these studies at all times of the day. Of course, you will build these rapports with time and other things. So do remember that when you're dealing with scientists, you're dealing with essentially people who are not used to being in the limelight, who are not used to talking in simple language. But if you press enough, if you ask questions, they will listen to you. And then slowly and gradually, you will develop a rapport with them and they will respond to you. And the entire exercise will become meaningful and much more important for public health communication. The other thing I wanted to flag is now when we come to experts, particularly in this pandemic, we've been asking ourselves, who is the right expert? So now that we're looking at an infectious disease, I think the set of experts that we should speak to more, we should have spoken to and should continue to speak to, should be first of all public health experts, right? Most of the times the understanding is, let's speak to clinicians, let's speak to doctors, let's see what doctors have to say. That is one aspect of when you are reporting on an epidemic or a pandemic. You need to speak to people who are community medicine specialists. You need to speak to people who are epidemiologists, because this is their area of expertise, right? Just as, in any newsroom, there is a defense reporter, there is a health reporter. Similarly, in the field of science, or particularly health communication, there are different kinds of experts. You will need to talk to doctors to understand what's happening in hospitals, but you will need to talk to public health experts to understand how a pandemic is managed. How do you manage communities? How do you manage people? What are your areas of focus? You will need to speak to epidemiologists to understand the progression of disease. This is a disease that is now 500 people, then 5,000 people, then 5 lakh people. What does this mean? Is it progressing in the way that we expected it to progress? Is it, what does a zero survey mean? What do all this data mean? So know the kind of people to get that right information from. And that would be really helpful, because you will be able to offer a balanced perspective, right? So that is one thing. The other thing is, there is a lot of hype. We have heard about everything from haldi to cinnamon to giloy to hydroxychloroquine. I mean, everything and anything seems to work on COVID, right? But as journalists, we know better that, everything is to be backed by evidence. So ask for evidence. The point is not whether haldi works better or whether hydroxychloroquine works better. The point is, what is the evidence? So it could well be that somebody also brought up during the previous presentations that anecdotes are not evidence. Anecdotes are just that. They are just anecdotes. I may take a medicine and I may feel better the next day. That really does not mean anything in science. That is just an anecdote, which is why a lot of studies are being done, which is why a lot of money is being invested. So that is one thing. When you're looking at clinical trials now to understand whether a drug works or a vaccine works or a herb works, the standards should be roughly the same for all. The gold standard. The gold standard is randomized controlled trials. RCTs. You need to say what is the evidence. So the gold standard in evidence is randomized controlled trials. I will not get into the technicalities because it's indeed a complex subject. But in every area or in any claim, you need to ask what is the gold standard evidence here, right? So, for instance, take plasma therapy. Right? From the beginning of the pandemic, we have been seeing this hype around plasma therapy. It works, it's this magic bullet, it's the silver bullet. But if you see evidence through these months, it has been nothing but discouraging, right? So if you write stories saying, it's a great therapy and look how many people it's helping, in some way you are not doing enough justice to your work. You have to ask what is the evidence, right? And you have to then connect these two things and provide the reader a perspective that here is a therapy that seems to work, but the evidence on it is still lacking, right? So you have balance. You are portraying both pictures, right? Like one of the scientists told me during this pandemic, a couple of weeks back, he said, so many things work best in the lab, in the petri dishes, on animals, but the minute those things, those drugs, those vaccines are tested on humans, the entire thing can take a completely different and opposite turn. So you have to remember that your stories cannot be having undue hype. They must be based on evidence around a drug, a vaccine, a herb, a therapy, what have you, right? So that's something you need to keep in mind, right? Don't get swayed by what the popular perception is, and everybody's writing, so what's the big deal? I'll also write. No, but if as a journalist you can challenge popular myths based on facts, you will be doing great service to humanity in general and to your people, your family, your loved ones who are consuming this information, right? So always remember that ethical responsibility is on you. It's not on the government, it is not on private groups, it is not really on anyone, but it's on you. How you handle that information, how you present it, how you raise people's hopes, and how you then, essentially help them understand that science is not easy business. You're not going to get results in a day. I might have just exceeded my time. Please let me know if you have. If I have. So I just to wrap it up. For instance, we spoke about vaccine. I spoke about vaccines. Now, please understand that this is going to be the dominant story in the coming months. Everybody is looking at vaccine trials. Will we have a vaccine? Will we have a vaccine today? Will we have a vaccine in the next 2 months? Typically, vaccines take years, decades. It takes forever to develop a new vaccine. You're going to give it to healthy people, right? You're not going to give it to sick people. You're going to give healthy people a certain kind of inactivated pathogen that will trigger their immune response. So from 10 to 15 years, we are shortening that window to 8 months, 10 months. So understand the pressure that will build on people who are involved in researching a vaccine, bringing out a vaccine, and those of us who are reporting the story day in and day out. Vaccines go through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4 trials, just as drugs do. At any point, things happen, things don't work. This is, of course, this is again based on a hypothesis. It has to be tested. It has to be tested first on small groups of humans, then larger groups of humans, and then even larger group of people. So the challenges are immense. As one of the public health experts said, the story of vaccine trials, it's like the story of 1,000 heartbreaks, a journey of 1,000 heartbreaks. Several things will go wrong. So do you want to give in to popular discourse of, we are just about to get a vaccine in the next 2 months? Or do you want to temper your audience to understand that this is a very high stakes game? And so there are studies that are coming that are showing some promise. However, experts say that there is still time to, these are still early days. Every story should have that but, however, which is a counter view, which is all basics. I'm sure you all know, and we do know as well. But what happens is when we are writing, as someone mentioned, we are on tight deadlines. And so we do tend to give in. So don't give in. The accountability, the responsibility to have and encourage scientific temper in your communities is huge, right? It's not just as simple as I'm doing my job. Give in to you are doing the job which is now that, right? So that thing has to be really remembered. You can use social media. Social media has a lot of experts these days. Lots of people sharing information on scientific studies, on trials and drugs and complicated stuff. So if you tap your Twitter accounts, you will find a lot of people are out there to give credible information, and these are all credible experts from credible universities, research labs, and hospitals and government agencies. So if you track them, you have a sense of what is going on, what are the kind of issues that are being debated. So that's one thing. BBC, for instance, does this great podcast on scientific issues, on vaccine trials, on drugs like remdesivir, tocilizumab, and all of those drugs that have been spoken about in COVID. The one thing which you should all try, and which we had the mission of, is to form groups, with journalists, those of you who are interested in the subject, and then you help each other, right? Journalism is not just about my story, I get it first and my exclusive. It's also about helping your peers, your friends, your colleagues in the community. So if you have groups, I was lucky to be part of a group where a lot of journalists were balancing ideas, bouncing off ideas of each other, helping each other understand complex things. It's not a solitary job. We are all isolated these days. So let's connect, form your own little groups on WhatsApp or whatever, where you can share information. And then last, with someone else, with Ramya also said that, no news is better than fake news. So that is indeed true. If you don't understand anything, don't write that story. story. You can take one day extra and still give out good information, verified information. A good story can be done. I firmly believe that it can be done definitely a day later, 2 days later, 3 days later. I work for a magazine. I read that story roughly after a week, or let's say 4 5 days. So it's still possible. You can bring in different angles. You can do all of that. So it's, as someone once told me, it's better to be late than to be wrong. So on that note, I think I've spoken for quite some time, despite not wanting to speak a lot. But floor is open if anyone has questions.
Thank you so much, Namita. And actually, you didn't speak for a lot of time. You exactly spoke the.
Oh, great. That's
Thank you so much for pointing out a lot of things which practically a lot of our colleagues and participants can take up. The floor is open for questions. You can ask both Namita and Dr. Nirmala questions. Ramya unfortunately had to leave because of some work, so she has put up her email ID where you can email her the questions. But if you have any questions to either Dr. Nirmala or Namita, please unmute and ask, or you can also type it in the chat box and the guest can answer. I think one question which came up to Ramya, and one of you can definitely answer, is how do you respond when a minister or a person in position disowns his own statement or post, especially in a time like COVID-19, and they have given a statement and they then the very next day say, I did not say it. How would you as a journalist, maybe Namita, you can answer, how would you handle that situation?
Okay, so it's always difficult to sort of dispel myths, especially when they come from sources of authority or political leadership. I mean, I know we have government people here, but media organizations also face a lot of pressure from governments. So what do you do? So the classic and the standard playbook trick is to find an expert who says, I don't think this claim is true. That way, you have done your due diligence. You have reported what Mr. XYZ minister said, and we have seen tons of Mr. XYZ ministers these days who have said all kinds of things from Haldi to whatnot. So, just get that one person who's willing to go on record and, just write a he said, she said story. So that way you're off the hook. No one's going to say that you didn't do your job well. You have juxtaposed an expert against a politician, and readers are far more smarter than we think. They'll figure out, acha, this is what the expert says, so maybe this is not something I should take on immediately. I should do. So that's my small suggestion, which I follow when faced with a situation like this.
Okay. I think Dr. Nirmala, there's one question here about are there any softwares or how to detect fake videos? You showed us about the fake photographs and Google reverse images. What about if there are fake videos? What's the way around those things?
Dr. Kailash, if I go explaining about debunking fake news on video, I would need another 40 minutes. We use Invid. There is another plugin that can be used for video verification. Another way is also where you take the key frame and you can search reverse image such that I showed. But that will take longer, but there are easier plugins today to do video verification. Invid is one of those plugins that we use. I see another question about Facebook in Canada. Someone has asked about how to verify Facebook news. Okay. There's another very interesting analytical tool called as CrowdTangle. You don't have to use all these engines to do that. Using CrowdTangle also, we can get we can figure out whether the news on Facebook is fake or real, and there are various ways of identifying the profile of the person. So CrowdTangle will also take a longer time to explain how to use the verification tool, but I think it's Mr. Vasant. You can use something called CrowdTangle. If you can figure it out, it will be great. Otherwise, if there is other options, we will train you at some point. That is another option for Facebook is there's something called transparency. If you see when you're looking at the Facebook page, you have this transparency place, Facebook transparency place, where you have detail about the person who has shared the information. So that is one of the first verification step, before you start using the plugins or the extension to verify. So I don't know, if there was a time I would have shown verification tools on Facebook or Twitter, like each of these platforms which are which today have become a very important source with many journalists working from home. They're very important, but they need longer time to explain how to use them. But the names are CrowdTangle, Invit, the videos Invit, for Facebook, CrowdTangle.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Nirmala. The floor is open for questions. Participants, you can unmute and ask your questions. Both Namita and Nirmala are here for it. You can also alternatively type it in the chat box. I would also like to just announce the feedback link will be provided at the end of the session. Participants, please note it will be provided only at the end of this session. We will just wait a minute or two to see if any questions come up.
Verification tools on Facebook or Twitter, like each of these platforms which are.
So, Namita, let me ask you, in your reporting of COVID in the past couple of months, have you come across something very, very wrong which has been reported, and then you had to debunk it to your colleagues itself?
So, I think I'm trying to now recall specific stories that were essentially way off the mark. I think one of the stories was basically around these hydroxychloroquine, around remdesivir, around plasma therapy. I think a lot of reporting is being very, sort of misleading. The point is that, yes, these drugs do seem to work, but in what situation, for which patients, all those nuances, I think, were not captured very well during this COVID reporting. Now, with mainstream media, the entire obsession around data has been, while it is required for us to assess data, I think people really want to know what is the benefit. Like, what if I get COVID? What do I do? For instance, there was a story on ashwagandha, or rather, let me recall the Baba Ramdev incident. Now that was really interesting because here is one person who went out to the media and said, "I have a drug that works." Okay, and there were no questions asked. It was just reported practically. In several newspapers. Since I don't follow regional media, I wouldn't be able to comment on what impact it had there. But everybody reported Patanjali's new miracle drug, magic bullet, has come. Now a lot of people went out and they started asking which stores can we get the Patanjali drug. It's only that after a day or two, at least a group group of us, or several of my peers in the media, health reporters started asking questions based on what evidence are you making this outrageous claim? Do you have an approval from the drug regulator? We started asking questions to the drug regulator. What is this? On what basis have you given this person or allowed this person to go ahead with this drug claiming 100% efficacy? So that story was interesting because at one point we were laughing about it, but fact is that a lot of people took it very seriously, and as much as a laughing matter it became for us, we have to understand that whether it is an Ayurvedic drug or a modern medicine, allopathic drug, the standards have to be the same for everybody. Right. So then many of us wrote stories asking experts, what is the ethicality in this? Is it ethical for you to be selling a drug in this time when people are panicking and so scared? So that was one story definitely that was, I think, not reported responsibly initially, and then of course everybody picked up. So that was one.
Right. All right. Thank you so much, Namita. We have, I think, one question which has come up. If both the guests can see it, what are the best ways to establish a good relationship with audience, listeners, readers? Namita ma'am said that we must stick to the facts, basically stand strong to our point, and not vaguely follow what the majority is conveying. How do we really bring out the essence and bring the audience attention to a point over other irrelevant articles? I think, Namita, you have touched upon this a bit. Would you want to brush upon it a bit more?
Sure, unless Nirmala ma'am wants to go first.
I would say what I mentioned in my presentation. The best way to win the reader's trust. The audience, the more they have access to fake news, they will leave your platform. I'm sure we are seeing what is happening with Republic, to name the channel. So it's important, and I was also mentioning about echo chamber. You listen to one view, one perspective, and the effect is such that it will affect us only in the end. So it's important to understand the best way to deal with this is to verify and to disseminate factual, reliable news. That is, and also that will retain readers for longer. Some of us are reading the paper from the time I think we have been in school, and we have not changed those papers because they have been providing reliable and factual news. So if you're saying how to retain audience, reader, and listener, ethical journalism will also let you survive in the business longer. There are media platforms like Hindu that have been century and odd old because of the factual info. We have examples, and we have current examples like The Wire, who are doing commendable job. So I think it's as I mentioned, apart from nose to news, what we need is eye to details, and that is what I would say. Yes. It's important, and I was also mentioning about echo chamber.
Namita, any comments on the same?
Yes, so Aishwarya, that's a good question. But looking at your question, the first thing I would say is try to be brief, because you want your audience. See, because your audience is impatient, right? And you're trying to tell them something which is complicated and which is of use and interest to them, but they don't understand this. So, if you keep your communication brief and concise and sharp and to the point, the reader will read. Okay. Now, as Nirmala ma'am also mentioned, Republic TV and all those things. See, there will be two ways always. There will be that way to go the Republic way, to do really viral kind of stories, to do sensational stuff, and then suddenly become this huge name. That will give you short-term gains, but eventually your audience, your reader, your your peers will understand that you are not doing as great a job. The other way will be slow, steady, but in the long run, in the long term, you will get more benefit. So if you always, take some time, I'm not saying take days on end, that will be a challenge, but it's great if you can take several days and write a long story. But try to, always base your work on facts. Sooner or later, the viewership, readership will follow. It will take time. You will feel that my colleagues are doing these really super fast stories, but in the long run, everybody will recognize here is a credible voice. The Twitter followers will come. They will not be like 30,000 or whatever, but even those 3,000 people who will follow you will understand that if I read a story around the Russian vaccine, I'm not able to understand, is it a good vaccine? Oh, let me go to Aishwarya's Twitter or let me read Aishwarya's story. She possibly will have something to say. So it will take time. You just have to be patient, rigorous, and just keep at it. Don't give up. Keep at it.
Right. I think for the next question, Amita already touched upon the taking not a day but a few moments. Nirmala, do you want to comment how much time does it exactly consume to check facts?
It should not take long. If you're writing a story to the masses, you can at least spend another few more minutes to check what you have, what information you have got. I did show about image verification. Once you have the plugin, you just have to paste it on the particular platform, and you have information. You have detailed information, and thankfully we have platforms like Alt, Boom, which are also fact checking. So you also have fact checking database platforms which can also be helpful. Another important thing is you need to understand the consequence of spread, of the news not being reliable. Then the correction process will take longer. That's it's rather it's better that we learn certain verification tools and understand how to use them, and it should not take much time. Thankfully, we have tools in place. For example, if you remember, like during the Rajasthan election, Sachin Pilot's wife, Sara Pilot's Twitter. There was a fake Twitter account created, and if you observe properly, it is not even followed by Sachin Pilot or Omar Abdullah, who's her brother. It's very interesting that when you look at these, whether any of the posts on social media or otherwise, you need to look at the details, and that will take a little time. But it is important. It is important because that particular news about from the fake news handle of Sarah Pallet was also published by IANS. IANS is one of the important news agencies in the country, and they carried the news. So the mistakes can be big, and not just at a political level. I'm just giving you an example of an election, and not election, about what was happening in that state. But I'm saying if you bring it down to very crucial aspect as health, it can have a consequence that can not be corrected. Like the WhatsApp video about MMR vaccine in Kannur. So it's important to take time, and today we have tools, so it is not time consuming. So we have tools, just we need to be trained to use those tools, and we are a group of health fact checkers network. We're a small group of educators and journalists. We have been trained in using these tools, and we would like to train people if there is an opportunity whenever we get time. And we are doing this because of the pandemic. We're trying to do as much as training we can, so that people can there can be less of fake news and other. In fact, I'll share a feedback from end of this event, because we're a small group and we're trying to do what we can to debunk fake news. And if you can share your feedback, we can also improve our presentation. And I know I would have loved to do it in the languages. I know it's there are journalists from vernacular media, but I think probably the next time when we get opportunity, we would love to do it. But knowing the tools is not going to be time consuming.
Right. Certainly, Nirmala, I think we will also look forward to more workshops like this, same with Navita joining us. I think we have crossed our time limit, and I would like to take this opportunity to invite Dr. Parashram Kamath, who has been the single source of managing this whole thing, to thank all our guests and deliver the vote of thanks. Dr. Parashram, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kailash sir. Hope I am audible.
Yes, you are.
Okay. On behalf of Field Outreach Bureau, Mysore, Ministry of Information Broadcasting, Government of India, and Department of Media Studies, Christ deemed to be University, Bangalore. First of all, we would like to thank our resource person of this workshop, Dr. Nirmala MN, Assistant Professor, Department of Media Studies, Christ deemed to be University, Bangalore, and a member of Health Fact Checking India Training Network. Ramya Kannan, Chief Bureau of the Hindu, Chennai, Tamil Nadu, and Namita Koili, Special Correspondent, The Week, New Delhi, for your very interesting and thought-provoking address. Thank you. Thank you. We would like to thank all the participants from across South Indian state. Because of your active participation, we could organize this online workshop. We thank Mr. S. Venkateshwar, IAS Director General, Regional Outreach Bureau and Press Information Bureau, South Zone, and Mrs. Natasha D'Souza, IAS Director, Regional Outreach Bureau, Press Information Bureau, Bangalore, and all the officials of various units of Ministry of Information Broadcasting, Government of India, for their dignified presence. We are also grateful to Dr. T.C. Purnima, IAS, Deputy Director, Field Outreach Bureau, for delivering the introductory words and constant support, encouragement, and timely guidance from the beginning to till the date. We would like to take this opportunity to thank the Christ deemed to be University management team for the support they have been provided in arranging this workshop. We like to express our sincere thanks to Father Biju Kesi, Associate Professor, Director Christ, Banerghatta Road Campus, for your dignified presence and continuous support, encouragement, and timely guidance from the beginning until the day. So I thank Professor Padmakumar MM, Head Department of Media Studies, Christ MTB University, Bangalore, today's guest of honor on this occasion, and support and guidance Sir has extended to all of us. I express thanks to all the members of organizing committee of this workshop, Dr. Alex Sir, Professor Joel, and Dr. Kailash for their kind support and guidance. Finally, I express thanks to the warriors of our workshop, our student volunteers. So Adish, Balamurugan, Divina, Karthik, Varsha, they have worked a lot for this workshop day and night. Because of their effort, we reached all the participant resource person in time. Thank you, students. Thank you, one and all. And in this workshop, a good number of faculties were presented. Faculties were present on this occasion. I would like to thank all the participants as well as the faculties. Now we will post the feedback link. So kindly use this feedback link to give your feedback along with your name and email ID to all of us. I express thanks to all the members of organized. Yes, thank you, one and all. Dr. Alex Sir, Professor Joel, and Dr. Over to Kailash.
Thank you, Dr. Parashram. Please, participants, please do fill up the feedback form. We will also be sharing the feedback form from the network of health fact checkers, which Dr. Nirmala mentioned through the WhatsApp group. The Google Chat now has the feedback form. Please do provide all the necessary feedback. Thank you once again for participating. We hope that you will be part of our future initiatives like this. And let's all together hope that we fight both the pandemic and the fake news which follows. Have a nice weekend, everyone, and thank you.
Use this feedback link to give your feedback along with your name and email ID. I express thanks to all the members of organized. Yes, thank you one and all. Dr. Alex sir, Professor Joel, and Dr. Over to Kailash.
Thank you, Dr. Parashuram. Please, participants, please do fill up the feedback form. We will also be sharing the feedback form from the network of health fact checkers, which Dr. Nirmala mentioned through the WhatsApp group. The Google Chat now has the feedback form. Please do provide all the necessary feedback. Thank you once again for participating. We hope that you will be part of our future initiatives like this, and let's all together hope